Since you as a natural lifter have no exogenous stimulus for muscle growth, you must implement the principle of progressive overload to trigger muscle synthesis, which simply means doing more total work over time. The way we're going to put this into practice is by following, or better yet, creating your own personalized training program. I'll not be going into the practical side of how I write my own training programs. I'll only explain the reasoning of why I take the approach that I do. By now, you should know there are three main variables in lifting programs, those being intensity, volume, and frequency. You can think of intensity as reaching your muscle's maximum work capacity, or in other words, reaching muscular failure. Therefore, intensity caps out at 100%, meaning that once you've achieved muscular failure on an exercise, you've reached peak intensity. A very important side note, intensity is not a measure of fatigue. Many people conflate the two, thinking that they're working out with a great intensity and achieving something just because they're getting tired. While that may be true, it is not necessarily true. If you're not convinced of this, think of the last time you maxed out on a lift. It probably was not as fatiguing as your regular max effort working set. This is because your 1 rep max usually takes anywhere between 3 to 5 seconds, while a working set can take anywhere from 30 seconds to 1 minute or even more. The last point on why you absolutely must train with maximum intensity is that you can only objectively know how hard you've trained if you reached failure. Everything else is your own subjective assessment. Most of the time, your subjective assessment is not accurate. Number 2, volume. Workout volume is in theory infinite, meaning that you could technically keep adding reps and sets to your workouts forever. Now, since intensity is the only variable you can max out, you absolutely should, especially if you've been training for a couple of years. I'm a big proponent of high intensity training, taking every set to failure. I've always had this approach as it was only natural to me that the greatest effort yields the greatest results. However, I used to think that the more work or more hard sets I did, the faster I would grow. This doesn't work. This doesn't work because whenever you do your first working set, which you took to failure, your ability to replicate that effort in your next set drops off drastically. So if you're training effectively, you should have exerted yourself to a level where you fail 3 to 4 reps short of what you got in your first set. Keep in mind that this only applies to the first 2, 3, or maybe 4 sets that you do. Anything beyond that is slowly approaching endurance territory. A practical example of this would be, let's say you're doing a set of max pull-ups. Let's assume that you can do 20 pull-ups as your max. So you do 20 pull-ups in your first set, you would be hard-pressed to do 15 in your second set. In your third set, you might not even get 10. But it's unlikely that you would ever go below 4 to 5 reps, even if you did 20 plus sets of pull-ups. While on the topic of reps, I never concern myself with how many I get in a given set in isolation. While it is true that the 10 to 15 rep range is the most optimal for muscle growth, I never limit myself to a rep range. This means that I would never stop a set because I hit a rep target that I had set beforehand, because in that case, I would not have reached muscular failure. I only focus on reaching muscular failure, irrespective of how many reps it takes me to get it. I do, however, aim to surpass the number of reps I get session to session. I do not, of course, manage to get more reps in, especially as I become a more advanced lifter. Realistically, it will take you weeks before you add a single rep to any compound move once you start using serious weight. However, I do not solely focus on getting as many reps as possible. I focus on how deep of a stretch I got on every rep, how quick and forceful my concentrics were, how good my technique was. These are all areas of improvement for me. Now, when it comes to the number of sets I do, I'm very conservative with adding any unless I assess that the stimulus I'm getting from the current volume is insufficient. This is the second crucial point of the video. Forget adding weight to the bar as your primary mode of progression. Add volume. If you're wise, you remain at your current working weight for as long as possible and milk it for all the size gains it can give you before leveling up to the next weight category. This is because when you get your numbers up, and inevitably you will, your current working weight will not be sufficiently challenging anymore. I remind you, you are not a powerlifter, so do not train like one. Forget adding weight to the bar as your primary mode of progression. Add volume. Add volume. Once you've noticed you've started to plateau and you haven't managed to get any more reps in for 2 weeks, add 1 more set. The reason I say 2 weeks is because I believe it's a sweet spot, because it accounts for the possibility of you just having a bad day in the gym or you just don't really feel like working out, the weight feels heavy, whatever. The reason I'm very concerned with adding volume too quickly is because I believe you can very quickly end up adding too much and end up doing what I call cardio with weights, otherwise known as junk volume. I simply do not believe you can do more than 3 to 4 challenging sets per muscle group. Anything beyond that is, to me, junk volume. which only adds fatigue and a misplaced sense of intense training. Number 3, frequency. The idea behind frequency is that you have to hit a muscle group a particular number of times per week for it to grow. Generally, this is true, but what many fail to realize is that nothing magical happens at Sunday midnight, whereby unless you've hit all of your numbers by then, meaning that unless you did your 20 sets of chest, your 15 sets of back, and your 10 sets of arms, all of the week's efforts will be in vain. I know that many people hold this dogmatic belief in their mind without even realizing it. You can hear a similar idea being shared when people say that your bench doesn't count unless you touch the bar to the chest, as if all the gains are made by touching the chest to the bar. So these things are ridiculous, funny at best, but in reality are probably hurting your ability to progress. Know that you don't have to follow a 7-day workout program. I don't. You can create an 8-day program, a 10-day program, whatever suits you and your personal goals. So instead of thinking, how can I fit all of my workouts within 7 days, take the approach of assessing how many days it takes a particular muscle group to recover and then plan accordingly. I could train my arms every other day because they recover quickly, but I can only train my legs effectively every 4 days. Structuring your program by first figuring out how much time it takes a particular muscle group to recover and then planning accordingly instead of trying to fit all of your workouts within 7 days will change the game for you. I guarantee it. If you recover quickly, you very well might benefit from greater frequency. But if you're someone who requires more rest, you'd be wise to adopt more spaced out workouts instead of a cramped schedule. Though generally, your arms recover within a day or two, your larger muscle groups like your chest and your back recover 2 to 3 days after a workout, while your legs may take anywhere from 3 to 5 days to recover. And especially for legs, I've made phenomenal progress by spacing out my leg workouts 4 days apart. Even though I felt good to go after 3 days, that additional day indeed made a difference. So I invite you to try this as well. To conclude the video, I will share a perspective that will hopefully inspire you to keep training naturally for life. Your physique as a natural lifter is not only the result of hard work, but of intelligent work as well. And since your gains are solely the result of your diligence, they're yours to keep for life. That's something to take pride in. And unlike other pursuits that you might partake in, bodybuilding and training in general centers entirely around this one project, your body, that you poured hours upon hours of effort into. Training naturally necessitates a deep understanding of training principles and mastering of training technique, meaning that years down the line, you will become a master at your craft and you will have an incredible physique to show for it. With that, I conclude the video. Thank you for watching.